afternoon, good morning, everyone, wherever you are, whatever time of day it is. Welcome again to the Near Memo with Mike, Greg, and David, where we talk about search, social media, and commerce, and what it means, why we think it's interesting, and so on and so forth. I flubbed that a little bit, but that's okay. Today we've got sort of an all SMB program here, I think, today, and we're going to start out with Mike and the Tock acquisition by SquareSpace. So why was that interesting to you, Mike?
So David mentioned Tock, and it was the first I'd actually heard of them several weeks ago in a Near Memo, and they had recently introduced a subscription-based delivery service that was sort of a much lower cost than DoorDash type of thing. So it was a much more restaurant friendly, and they have taken a restaurant friendly approach. I went and looked them up to their reservations. They come out of the restaurant industry. So SquareSpace is a very horizontal product, but Tock is a very vertical product. And I thought it was sort of a brilliant play on their part that I see a huge market opportunity in restaurants. There are 1 million restaurants in the United States, even with the losses from the last year. 70% are single unit operations. It's still an area where a family can create wealth for themselves. Unlike most industries in this country, like retail is now lost to that. And I see it as having a lot of potential there. I mean, I looked this up at the National Restaurant Association. Table restaurants make approximately $300 billion in sales annually. It's a huge market.
I think it's bigger than that.
Well, this was just table service restaurants.
Oh, okay.
Right?
The fine dining.
The fine dining, right?
Yeah.
And it just is, it offers wealth creation opportunities while certain segments like fast food and casual are largely controlled and been rolled up by national brands, the desire, and I think this will only increase for true local ethnic and boutique restaurants, will be strong. And these restaurants have historically, used Facebook for their marketing. They're weak on understanding the value of websites and of search. So there's a tremendous amount of upside, and it's not largely underappreciated in that industry. And as I demonstrated in Spot to Be case study I did last year, massive amounts of new traffic is being driven by Google to restaurants through maps and search and the local pack. And it's a huge recurring revenue opportunity well beyond website hosting. In terms of several hundreds of dollars, if not more, a month, because they need, depending on where you're at in the stack, they need reservation services and they need delivery and all sorts of things that I think are interesting. And there's this huge, as you pointed out in this week's newsletter about the pent up consumer demand. I think it's going to really, really strike in restaurants. I don't know if you remember that review I sent you earlier in the week. This was from Chelsea Lapp. She wrote up a Bacchus wine bar in Buffalo. And I went to look them up today to learn a bit more about them. And to my point, their website is offline. I clicked on their website on GMB and their website was offline. And this review is just so amazing to me because I read it and
it's very long. It is
long. I'm just going to read a couple little snippets of it. But she and her boyfriend created a bucket list of restaurants they wanted to go to. And I thought that was fascinating, right? And Post-COVID. And this was one of the first ones they went to. It's not post-COVID, and they were just so enamored. They thought it was pure magic, even though it was outside their budget. And they built their list from TripAdvisor and Yelp, but they wrote this review on Google. So the whole thing just demonstrates to me all of what you've been saying during the week. And I think it's a smart acquisition.
It strikes me that going out to eat is the new vacation, at least in the short term, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, because you're not going to be able to travel that far. And once things start opening up and you've been double jabbed, the local restaurant scene's your oyster.
That's right. I also thought it was a very smart acquisition. Mike, I'll piggyback on a couple of things you said. For one thing, websites are a very sticky product, we know, in the SaaS world. So Squarespace, sort of already has a pretty good trajectory of sticky revenue. And I have to think that a back office operational system like Tock is also a very sticky product. So I think from that standpoint, it makes a ton of sense. The difference is that Squarespace can only really charge 10 or 15 bucks a month for a website, just given the very competitive website building space. But Tock has established a much higher price point, very high value product for this restaurant industry. It'll be interesting to me to see whether this means Tock is going to expand beyond the restaurant vertical into some of the other categories where Squarespace is really popular. For instance, salons and health and beauty services. I could very easily see Tock, getting into some sort of appointment booking space. It's a really well designed app from the consumer side, as is Squarespace. So I, without knowing a lot of the financial details, I know some of them were reported as cash and stock. I have no idea what Tock's growth rate is or anything like that, but strategically, it strikes me as a very good fit, very good. I hate the word synergy, but it seems like a win-win for both players.
You have to believe that they've done that analysis. How elastic is this, and how many categories could we expand this into? You have to think that they've done that, and there probably are 4 or 5 that they could extend it into. Mike,
unlike
I think it aligns them.
Very business. Both services are very business focused.
I was just going to say the same thing. They're really the anti-Yelp in terms of their consumer sentiment towards their products. Both very, very well regarded, I think, in the alignable.
So the interesting question that arises in my mind from this is, I included a chart that sort of laid out a bunch of the website builders. Interestingly, WordPress wasn't on there. But to what extent does this now put pressure on others? Wix has done a bunch of acquisitions, and I can't think of off the top of my head, but
they recently announced a GMB integration, for example.
Right.
Wix
Yeah.
did.
Right. So to what extent do these website companies now, I mean, they've all had marketing services. GoDaddy's had marketing services forever. But to what extent do they need to really get into these sort of back office, much more integrated, e-commerce-y kind of functionality to sort of remain competitive with one another? Does this then spur others to do similar kinds of acquisitions or look at this kind of stuff themselves, do you think?
I absolutely think so, if they haven't already done it. And I think that this is in addition to having a steep learning curve in order to make updates and customizations, WordPress is really at a disadvantage here by not having all of this stuff really well integrated out of the gate. Obviously, the advantage of WordPress is third-party plugins, but I see Squarespace and Square and Shopify as really being miles ahead of the competition, including Wix, in a lot of this functionality. And in terms of back-end user experience, as someone who's helped several dozen SMBs set up a website in the last couple of years, the other players are just so far behind the curve that I think that they will probably have to make acquisitions to catch up.
In fact, Square went from being a POS system and then sort of CRM tool to building websites. So they went in the other direction.
They acquired Weebly in order to do that.
Yeah.
Yes, and Weebly has made great strides as a platform, both on the UX side as well as the SEO side of the published website. So I credit somewhere in the Square employee product ecosystem as someone who understands the importance of SEO, and they've done a great job of executing.
It's interesting that a website becomes a feature in a back-end office suite.
Yeah. I mean,
that's true.
The discussion around websites feels different to me now than it used to. Like just a couple of years ago, we don't need to rehash this, but websites was sort of a commodity product and not that interesting anymore. And now it feels sort of like there's a comeback here, and there's much more importance being placed on websites, but websites plus these other tools as an integrated platform.
That's right. And I think, just if I could give a small plug to the local marketing stack, which is this framework I came up with 4 or 5 years ago, I think you're seeing the sort of more fundamental back office systems like Square and Shopify, of course, has sort of always had a website, but that this back end functionality is really actually more central to the success of a business than a website. And we're starting to see, this sort of the coming together of multiple functions to enable both online and offline commerce to piggyback on a consistent theme.
I mean, the web site 3.0, 4.0, 5.0 is sort of partly being driven by e-commerce in a way. I mean, even if the e-commerce is just some sort of appointment booking and not total shopping cart transactions. Okay, so let's go to you, David, on that note, and your item this week, messaging, GMB.
Sure. So I forget. I must have seen Joy tweet about this, but she wrote an article for Local U detailing the process of messaging a business, and after the message had sent, Google prompting her to see if she wanted to get a quote from 3 other competitors of the business to whom she had sent the message.
For a brand search. It wasn't even a keyword search. It was a brand search. So she looked for a specific business.
Right, and message them from their Google My Business profile, and then got their competitors showing up on their Google My Business profile. Darren Shaw has also highlighted in the last week that Google now seems to be showing, in certain instances, this is not as replicable, but seems to be showing competitors even for brand searches in more and more places on the business profile. And this is interesting to me for a couple reasons. Historically, we've talked about the importance of messaging to Google's 2021 and beyond GMB strategy. So this seems like a bizarre feature for Google to have added in if they want more businesses to adopt messaging. I mean, this is probably the biggest disincentive I can think of for a business to adopt messages in GMB, on top of the fact that it's a pain in the butt to respond to all these in real time. But to present Google with the opportunity to show your competitors seems very counterproductive.
I agree that it seems
for Google to do this.
It seems very strange. I agree. Go ahead.
And the other thing is just to reemphasize something Mike and I have been saying for years, which is that your quote unquote Google My Business profile is not really your Google My Business profile, it's Google's. And you need to build equity in things that you actually own, which are your website and your own customer list.
I used to say you used to rent your presence at Google, but now it's like you're renting a chair at WeWorks.
You're a subtenant.
Yeah, it says, guys, sublet. That's right. You don't know if you're going to get the same chair next week. I mean,
it's a fractional ownership, like a timeshare now.
Absolutely, totally tone deaf. Classic Google small business.
So Yelp kind of does the same thing with their RFQ product.
What does that stand for?
Well, a request for proposal or quote.
Okay.
So it's essentially lead gen, where you look up you need a plumber, and you can ask for them to give you a quote on, I haven't used it in a while. And then they have a list below of comparable, competitive businesses, and they are checked by default. So you're going to send your lead out to multiple businesses unless you uncheck the boxes, even though you're focused on a single business. You've identified the business, you want to talk to them. They default to this, multiple lead approach, which I think is unfortunate.
Well, some places it makes sense, like in local service ads where you're doing a search,
a category
looking
search,
for a quote, a category search, right?
Yeah.
And you're looking specifically to get a quote in a category search. Makes total sense, and I think Google's work there is actually halfway decent. But putting it on a knowledge graph for a brand search seems just it's up.
That's a head and tail kind of thing. I mean, I'm sure the people who are doing the consumer thinking are saying this is a great service for our customers, Well,
that's what Google said to us when we asked them about it in a meeting a couple weeks ago. Oh, it's a great, I've done these searches myself. This is what I would want. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So there were a lot of things that caught my eye this week and that were interesting. I'm not going to talk about Amazon opening discount stores, or the rumor about them opening discount stores before COVID. I'm not going to talk about Walgreens opening a bank. What I will talk about is the acquisition of advertising platform Addy by GroundTruth, which is a location intelligence company that does location-based ads and does audience targeting and offline attribution using location data. And so this is a small business ad platform that enables business owners to create ads across digital media and traditional media, interestingly, magazines, direct mail, out of home might be in there. I forget the list of the total list. It's all sort of display. It looks all like it's display advertising. And there have been multiple, just sort of as a historical digression, there have been multiple versions of this over the years. People that were trying to simplify display advertising for small businesses in the ad creative and create dynamic combinations. And I should go back through the archives. I mean, there's been a whole bunch of these guys, but GroundTruth bought them, and it looks complementary, sort of. GroundTruth, I think, has made a big bet on the small business marketplace. Many of its competitors have gone into the enterprise and are dealing with a much more sophisticated buyer. But GroundTruth has had some traction in small business, not to the exclusion entirely of enterprise. And I think this is an extension of that, an acquisition strategy, sort of extending their value proposition, a differentiator from a small business standpoint. Execution, of course, is a different matter, but kind of interesting. So you were a big skeptic of this, David. What are your thoughts?
I'm not necessarily skeptical of Addy as a product at all, and I'm not skeptical of the strategic fit for GroundTruth necessarily. I just feel that it is not the first place that it's not the place I would spend my first advertising dollar if I were a small business. So let's say I've got a Square or a SquareSpace Tock sort of integration set up. I'm not sure that I would think to do programmatic advertising until I was in business for a couple of years and I had a full-time marketing person helping me understand, where these ads should be placed, how to do proper attribution, all of those things. I think that the execution of this it's more complex than a Facebook, promoted post to a specific audience. And B, I think it's probably more expensive to do that, particularly when you're talking about traditional media. Now, maybe there's a secret sauce there that I don't understand. If they're, for instance, if they're buying unused ad slots on, Comcast that are available at a deep discount and enabling an SMB to get into those kind of slots, I think that's great.
There's some of that probably going on. You can buy magazine. Yeah, you can buy magazine inventory with this also, physical magazines.
Right, and so typically we haven't seen the level of return on ad spend on print media that we do in digital. Maybe that's changing as digital gets more expensive and more competitive. We might be reaching an equilibrium. I just think it's not the first place I would spend my ad dollars as a relatively small business. And the question then becomes, okay, so if I am a sophisticated enough business to have a full-time marketer or to have hired an agency, do I need a self-service ad product, or is that something that I'm hiring someone to do for me?
So that's a very good point. I think that this product is really probably for a larger business, small business still, but somebody who's more sophisticated. Mike, what did you have any thoughts? I don't want to.
This is not something I know anything about.
Yeah, so. Well, I don't know the product well enough to really talk about how good or bad it is. I mean, it's. We were talking about how it's Paper G had a similar kind of objective, although entirely in the digital space. But there have been people have had this kind of idea before. I mean, forever and ever, these publishers and agencies that work with small businesses, media companies have all said, we're the one-stop shop, and we're going to give you complete coverage everywhere you need to be. And this is sort of another version of that, although it has an offline component to it, which I found really fascinating, because in some instances, I think, as David is saying, there may actually be some economical media buys. I mean, we'll have to see how it plays out. It definitely gives them something more to say to the small business than this kind of relatively sophisticated location data ad pitch. Find your audiences wherever they may be. You can abstract it to a really simple pitch, but when you get into the mechanics of it, it's sort of complicated. So this may help with acquisition and with a pitch. It's kind of interesting. I mean, I'd like to sort of learn more about it to really get a sense of whether it's viable.
Do you know how GroundTruth is going to market today? Like, how are they getting customers today? Is it through? So
they have direct, and they have resellers. As I haven't talked to them in a while. They have resellers, and they have direct sales, as far as I know. And I mean, I think it's a really tough sell to the small business. It may work quite well. What's interesting about GroundTruth is that they used to work with a lot of franchises. Maybe they still do. They had a lot of franchise and QSR business. And they had introduced a pay per visit model. So you're only going to pay if somebody actually walks into the restaurant or walks into the store, which I thought was fascinating and seemed to be the direction the market was going. It's kind of an arbitrage thing in a way that they're doing, but they're only charging the and Ninth Decimal then did this. Ninth Decimal was acquired by InMarket, but that model seems to have not really taken hold, which is kind of interesting, because it seems to be the ultimate performance marketing model for certain kinds of advertisers.
How much of that is affected by the Apple IDFA?
Oh, I think
change coming up.
This is the big question: is how many people are going to opt in. I've only seen one of those messages so far from Macy's, and I of course didn't opt in. There's some indication that people are, depends on how you frame the question. Most people don't want to be tracked. Sometimes they're willing to share data if they see a tangible reward or return or benefit for it. So until, there was some Location Sciences, a company in the UK, did some research that said 60% of people would, not share location, or so we're going to see a loss of location data. We're going to see a loss of IDFA information, but I don't know exactly how big it'll be. Maybe it's by half. That's not necessarily true on the Android side, and maybe you can model it, and sort of do some extrapolation there. We'll see. I mean, in a few months, we'll know better. So, all right.
Very interesting. Well, it's an interesting acquisition, and I certainly applaud GroundTruth for attempting to address the SMB market when so many competitors, as you said, are just going up market.
I mean, I do want to...
Nice to see these solutions enabled for small businesses.
Yeah, I do want to talk to them and get a little bit more insight into it. I haven't had any time this week. But anyway, do you want to say any final stuff before we go this week? Plug our Street Fight session, if that's relevant.
Our weekly pitch of the Street Fight Summit, exactly. Yeah, and I believe Local U Advance is coming up next week.
Local U Advance next week, and then I just want to pitch our newsletter, which has shifted to 3 times a week. Is that correct?
Yes.
Which you can sign up for at
based on your feedback, you being the listeners.
Yes, absolutely.
And so you can just sign up for that at the website nearmedia.co. If you're listening to this podcast. So
yeah, absolutely, and give us feedback. I mean, it's been very valuable, the feedback we've received so far. As Mike indicated, the frequency change is a direct result of that, and we'd love to hear what kind of coverage you want to see, and anything else you have to say to us. We're inviting you to do that.
And if you're listening to this podcast and you'd love to see our beautiful faces, you can actually watch us on YouTube and follow us there as well.
All right. And with that, everybody have a good week and a happy Easter if you're celebrating Easter. And if you're listening to this after Easter, well, hopefully it was good for you. And that's all I have to say.
And enjoy the Final Four.
Yes, and the Final Four, of course. All right.
That's right.
So see you next.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.